of how ethics can go wrong in both traditional and modern contexts. When ethics goes wrong in traditional context, we call it corruption. When ethics go wrong in modern society, we call it bad faith. It's bad faith. Bad faith. They're both the same thing, but in different contexts. I'm just trying to explain so that I actually wrote a paper on ethics, that what we need is convergent ethics that covers both the traditional and modern for the 21st century. I also write this about knowledge systems. But I'm just trying, I have a very clear sense of why there is a problem. And I think you also need, if you're trying to say, why is the problem taking a theory from American theorists and putting into the name, talking about Malaysian talent or whatever, or franchising or something else. There's a clear reason why there's a problem. I'm just giving you an example. We're talking about two different kinds of knowledge systems. But you're also talking about taking from the context. So in culture, for example, there's a concept between high context versus low context cultures. That's the reason they use the expression high context versus low context, for that reason. But if you're really into all knowledge is contextual. I don't want to get too much philosophy here, but I'm just giving an example of why there is why this is. It's always a very interesting one. It's a very good one, I think, for PhD. That if you want to say, I want to take a model of talent, talent retention, organisation or whatever. Yeah, and my focus is in a developing country. Well, you've got the natural context that you can talk a little bit about the general theory, but you can talk about the context. So it's actually quite a useful way of framing a PhD. Framing assessment models, whatever as well. And anyway, come back to it, so I don't want to get sidetracked, but okay, you're getting the point that we just want three, are you going in the right direction? The issue of talent, I actually had a very close look at the Talent Corporation Malaysia, so I know their policies very well. And it's something we can talk about maybe later. I can talk to you about it, but it's sort of interesting. There is a kind of, because the retention part of the Talent Corporation is partly to keep people in Malaysia, but it's also to get people back who left Malaysia 20 years ago, 10 years ago. They went and studied overseas and they never came back. So the Talent Corporation is trying to attract them back as well. So retention has this sort of wider fields of interest when we start to talk about.
So when my intention is that in this paper, when I do my research, I would like to actually get the feedback from these talents, not from Talent Corporation, but from Malaysia's high-skilled talents that either here locally or migrated abroad, to see what is their perception on the value proposition differential factors that is projected by Malaysia to Talent Corporation and all that.
Yeah.
Being successful or not.
Yeah, you'll have a very nice little study to do here to say that you get feedback on existing Talent Corporation policies. You'll interview some of the people who are thinking in the local context, and you'll also maybe you talk to people who've already gone overseas and they're trying to get them back, and that will be a nice. And you'll be, are these policies good? What's wrong with these policies? What are they missing? How can they be improved? These are the sort of questions that you can ask. I don't want to get ahead of myself because we have to put in the structure, but I think I also say that when you're putting down the rationale, I'm already thinking, can I see a PhD? Can I see what this person is going to, where they're going to get the data? I'm already asking a little bit these questions. I want to see in my head that when you start to put something, I can already see this emerging. Because if I can't, I'll tell you to go and do something else. I don't see PhD here. So this is, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but we keep a little bit looking, where are you going with this? As I said, where you're coming from, where do you want to go with it? That's what I want to see in the one paragraph. All right, yeah. The literature gap.
Always aligned with the real world gap. Because the literature is theory and the real world is not.
All right, because I think the lady behind you wanted to ask about some literature gap. Maybe I try to address this issue right now. You wanted to ask about theory gap. Maybe this is.
Yeah, I asked for the theory gap because I wanted to know how, after defining the problem and knowing all the variable about the problem, how can I get the theoretical gap so I justify my thesis and its originality? Because you know, a PhD thesis it's about a new thing to add it to knowledge, not to replicate or repeat other.
I'll just give you a bit of my general advice. I mean, let me go from two directions. The first direction is that you always should, you need to find a gap in whatever you're doing in the PhD, theoretical, practical, you're looking for a gap.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Well, let me get to the literature of theory, because I know you, I think it's important to do this first. I think it's an important introduction, really. Even if you're wanting to do a very strong theoretical PhD, I want to hear more the practical reason, more the personal reason, more the professional reason why you want to do this. That's why I say, what's the outcomes? Who's the audience? Because this is, the theory will follow this. We'll get to the theory up here. But before you get too worried about theoretical gaps and literature gaps.
Yeah, I know that theoretical gap comes before identifying the problem. There should be a real problem, and
let me put it like this. And my PhD students will tell you. I mean, let's start with why you want to do it and the practical outcome problem. Because believe me, we will find thousands of theory gaps. I'll help you to find one. They're easy to find. But if you start being so worried about the theory in the first place, you will struggle to have a good design. So my advice to you is stop worrying about theory at the moment. When you do this, why do you want to do it? Where are you coming from? Where do you want to go? What's the outcome? So I say, what's the outcome? What's the audience? What's the problem? Don't talk about theory at this stage. We'll talk about theory enough later. So at this stage, I don't want to hear theory. I just want to hear why you're doing this. Where do you want to go with it? What's the outcome? If that includes that you do, I mean, if you do have a bit of an outcome, you want to contribute to a theoretical context, it should be implicit. It should be implicit. I should be able to see it, but I bet there it's more part of why you're doing it. You know, in other words, let's say it's a theory of leadership or something. Then you know, better you say that I want to have a theory of educational leadership in Laos to improve my university in my country. Better you say that first, because this guy. Let's move on now. Because this touches on the next question. Next step. You can see this guy. When I asked him what he wanted to do, we produced this in half an hour, just talking. And I asked him what, and he said several different things. But his big thing was that he was doing all this stuff on the theory of transformational leadership. So part of my job was to get off your theory horse for a minute. Get off the horse, and I still want to help you do transformational leadership. But if you keep insisting you're doing directly on the theory of transformational leadership, we don't have PhD. But I said if we start linking it to, and one of the answer lies here. This is the next step. So let's move on to the next step now. This is really the critical. This is probably the most important one. This holds everything together. And you'll see here, it's the answer to your questions also, in that the theoretical gap will be actually, and the literature gap, and the practical gap will all be in this question. So let's look at an example here. What kind of educational leadership model will be most effective to assist in transforming Laos universities and world class? We are, in a sense, linking a general problem with a particular problem, a contextual problem. And I'm getting him to, this is really the secret. I want to see in one question the linking of the general and the particular. Now, I should say it could work both ways. It could be that some people will say that improving Laos education system is their general area, and some will say it's more their specific area. It could actually be both. And that can work with a lot of topics. And so what are you more interested in? You know, leadership in the Iranian automobile industry. Are you more interested in a local solution? Are you more interested in generating internationally transferable models of leadership? It's the same problem here. So in other words, in a sense, I had to ask him, what are you more interested in? In fact, I sort of did. What are you more interested in? Are you more interested in being an international expert on transformational leadership? are you more interested in transforming Laos higher education and your university when you go back to Laos? What do you think his answer was? Yeah. You can have both. But the problem for him is that if you're so focused on being an international expert in transformation leadership, it will be very difficult for him to get past his PhD. It will be very difficult to do this anyway. But imagine somebody sitting in a new, because this is the problem. If you start to set yourself up as international expert on leadership, this is going to go to the top journal, top academics in New York, and they say, what does this guy from Laos know? Actually, maybe he knows a lot, but that's not the problem. He's going to have a lot of obstacles. That's my point. He'll have a lot of obstacles. But if he says, I'm just trying to be the expert on transforming the Laos higher education system, and I'm trying to do something on transformational leadership, maybe both audiences will listen to you. Just maybe. So you see my point, and you can then see that's why we came up with this question. In that I got him to say that he has two things that link together. So in a sentence, you have verb. The verb will link the subject and the object. So what we are linking the general and the particular. The verb is very crucial. So believe me, the selection of each words and how they link around the verb here, the verb is the transforming. Or to assist in transforming. It's a verbal phrase. We're linking two things. We're linking question of educational leadership model and to the question of world-class Laos institutions, or Laos as world-class institutions. So the system transforming is really the verbal connection. So I originally began as language teacher, so that's why I'm so strong on the words are very, very important. The combination here to get exactly what you want to do. And I say put a bit of time in it. So we just do a draft now. But when I really work, I say I want you to play around with the words till we get exactly comfortable. They've got exactly the right design. And so I'll say the same thing to you. But we only did this in a few minutes. This is very simple. But I think it's reasonably effective. He was quite happy with it because he was telling me I wasn't doing it for him, but I was making him link things together until he was happy and I was happy. And we're both quite happy with the whole thing in the end because he said, yeah, this is quite comfortable with where he wants to go with reflecting the rationale and this sort of question. So, in other words, the nouns are the information words. The nouns in the sentence are the words. We'll see 3 or 4 nouns, and the combination of the nouns linked around the verb is the key to coming up with a whole design for PhD. I would now like you all to have one sentence where you put some nouns with a verb that reflects linking a general area that you want to do the PhD in to some particular issue or problem that links to that in one sentence. It doesn't have to be perfect. We just start because the first one, I have a bit of a theory. The first one is very clumsy. But it's good to have the first one clumsy and then we polish it up. And we can keep improving it until... So actually I say this about the whole design. The first one we do for us. We don't do it for the examiner. We don't do it for the supervisor. We do this and then we can make it a bit more academic. Put it, if we need to, a bit later, the second. So let's have a few minutes and see if you can come up with one sentence that reflects your effort to do a rationale paragraph. And then we'll talk a little bit about that. So I'll give you just a few minutes. We're running out of time a bit. So I'll just give you a few minutes to see if you can come up with one sentence. Okay, look, we're running out of time, so let's have some example. So I'm just trying to look, I was trying to look for, get to the next level from this to here, but I couldn't find the slide, so I just have to explain to you in a minute. Let's very quickly, let's focus on some example. I'd just like to know that you're starting to think of the right sort of question, and then you can sort of play around with this. Anybody want to volunteer there? Ladies first.
Okay, we live in a highly complex and dynamic world. Crises are more and more becoming inevitable and affect the whole community and organization within that community. The problem is that no awareness among top management and decision makers to take crisis management in a proactive way. So they are more reactive.
Right.
In literature, I found that two complementary and two main factors to initiate crisis management in a proactive field, which is top management awareness and a supportive culture.
Okay, so your challenge, how did you get one sentence out of all of that? How did you get one sentence out of all of that? I want one sentence only.
One sentence.
One sentence only.
Okay, top management awareness and cultural support to initiate proactive crisis management for a more safe world.
I think, especially the first one, I keep it fairly simple, and maybe some supervisor wouldn't like it. It doesn't really matter, because I think it's better you try to get, if you say what sort of management strategy to have the best crisis management approach, something like that is, that's all you need to do. So in other words, after you've done the whole PhD and you've gone out and done all this stuff on the best methods and different organisational management approaches, we say, did you answer the question? If you have a sort of, I call it a fairly modest sort of question, you know, you could say, what is the best approach, how to improve the existing approaches, something like this. But you're linking that, so there's two things you need to do. One is linking what you say, well, the management, organisational management.
Top management awareness and cultural support.
So we have two sort of phrases coming together. One is, the area is crisis management. That's the area, so we will expect to see crisis management in there. But then the other thing you probably need to think a little bit about is, how do we put the other phrase to link to crisis management? Now, you used a couple of things. Was it support, cultural support?
Cultural support and top management awareness.
Right, because there's several things. You're going to have to simplify all that into something a bit more simple. It
Because
could be,
they are complementary, integrated in the whole.
well, for example, how you would start to do this. I'm not going to, I would do something like, you know, a question could be, you have to reduce those three different phrases into one phrase. Maybe something like organisational support includes top management awareness, includes cultural issues, into organisational support. You need one to simplify a little bit. Maybe something like organisational support is a word that links everything together. Then we have to say linking organisational support to crisis management in a way that's So at this stage, fairly modest, especially for the first version. It could be just something simple. What kind of support, what kind of organisational support is needed for the most effective crisis management? Well, there you go. You've got a PhD question, right? And then but you can see that it's a whole package, because this is probably the most innocent. I say innocent because I think this is the one where the architecture of what you do with the research will support that. So this one only has to locate and say what kind of organisational support for the most effective crisis management. What we put here will then become quite important. We'll come back to that. I might use that as an example in a minute. But you've got the picture. One sentence, organisational support for crisis management. Okay, let's have another example.
What are the most crucial attributes of Malaysian game downloader which contribute most to segment this market for app developers? So many words.
Oh, I mean, we'll have to translate that.
Okay, my main goal is help the app developer to segment the market. Because already I have found out most of the theory, they come up with something like some general thing and more theoretical attributes for adoption. Like they talk about how the system is useful or how the system is easy to use, those kind of things. But normally the app developer and real market, those business people, they don't rely on those kind of attributes. They rely on more, objective one like gender, age, those kind of things. I'm trying to come up with some attributes that can be more practicable. Practicable.
I mean, this will be a little bit challenging, but it's okay because we have to make the steps. And by trying to ask the question, you force yourself to be more specific. So we're linking. I'm getting you to link two things. One is clearly, let's say the general area is, for you, I'm sort of aware of it. Was it smartphone apps? Or to be a bit more specific, the market for smartphone apps.
Game apps.
Market for smartphone game apps. Okay, there is your context, right? But let's say that's the end of the sentence. But we then need to be a bit more clear on the particular link to this that you want to have an outcome, which comes back to how it's here. Now, you want something to do with attributes that will help you, obviously, to tap into the market for smartphone game apps. So really, we need to have a question, something along the lines. I'm a bit unclear on what exactly you're trying to do, but I would say something along the lines of what kind of attributes profile might really help to tap into the market for smartphone game apps. Then we're starting to get on the right path. Because you're going to have to think about a very specific outcome, and I think you'll start to think, I mean, I used to do a little bit of multimedia, and what the developers do is they develop profiles. You might need to do something a bit similar, the idea of attributes profile to help people who want to tap into something along those lines.
Yeah, particularly I'm looking at peer influence and personality traits. This is my whole things. Because it can help you to segment the market.
You're going to have to put some of this down here. You can't overload the main question. You need to keep the main question needs to be the area with the main outcome and problem addressed, and the supporting element where you need to know, would you say that?
Peer influence or subjective norms, culture.
Well, this comes to the issue of we need to structure here to build up to that. So the information we need will cover. So I've got a couple of formulas for using this, but basically you saw the one here is, there's several formulas. One is sometimes I say what are all the no, I'm just going to talk generally about it. One way is we identify all the factors here. This works a lot of the business stuff. Then we say, what are the most important, maybe internal versus external factors? And then we're up here you're starting to see we're building a foundation. We identify everything that's involved. Then we have to narrow down. This is just one formula. We say all the factors. And in terms of internal, external factors, market forces are external factors versus
I'm looking at like
design factors.
intrinsic motivation and extrinsic
Exactly.
motivation.
Well, this is, I'm just trying to help you a framework that you start to talk about this sort of stuff, you're seeing how you put into a PhD. And then here you start to say, what is the most critical for success? So you want to develop a formula for success to crack the market for smartphone apps. I know that's what he wants to do, make lots of money. He wants to be a rich businessman. Well, no, I mean, but this is how you problem solve. You start to think, how can I make lots of money? How do I crack the market? How do I develop my formula? Well, it's exactly what I'm trying to do for solving the Malaysia water problem. I want to have a formula and solve the problem. Actually, I made a formula. They just have to listen to me. That's another problem. It's a separate problem. But anyway, for successful business, to crack the smartphone game apps, you need to be focusing on the design. It's really for you the key outcome is a design issue. The attributes, profile, something like that. So you need to build up the factors of that foundation, comparing, and then you focus, the last question can be on the most critical. That's one way. It's not the only way. There's several ways that I kind of do this. In this one, we're trying to see, especially if you're linking several things together. So we said, existing educational leadership style is basically age and authority. As Laos attempts to show him what attributes and strategies. I gave him space here to make a comparison between traditional and modern leadership styles. He can cover both. So he's got, underneath this, we have a structure to do a comparison. If you want to put up, you're welcome to. Oh, look, oh, okay, sorry, I lost it.
Oh, do you want the pen?
It's all right, we keep talking. Anyway, you're getting the picture, so we're just almost at 1 o'clock. I think the first thing is, let's say that I want you to understand what you need to do. If you've got a pretty good question, no, it's okay, we don't really have time to do that. But we could do this with all of you, and this is what I do. Yes?
So on the questions and also the background that you put, this is how you derive topics.
This is how I derived the fail-proof design for a successful PhD. This is how I do. So in a sense, I had this problem. How do we have better design? This is a little bit my solution. My designs, one of my design solutions. In that, if you can do this, the whole PhD, because you saw in the other diagram, the 30 questions are collecting all the data. What I didn't tell you is that those 30 questions become the headings of the whole structure writing the PhD, the data analysis and findings up under those. We convert those 30 headings into, in Farrock's case actually, 30 was too many, so we're going to reduce it down to about 20 headings. And there's his PhD. Every answer to every question he writes up, and then there's the next section, and he finishes. I told you, in 6 months you do the whole PhD. This is the secret, is that in the sequence, as that structure, you build up to answer the main PhD question. The individual questions collect the data, and then you write it up as a PhD and answering your own question. Suddenly your PhD is finished. And you've answered the whole question, you've described the data collection analysis at each stage, and you've got the whole thing. But what you're developing is what I call an ecosystem. There's a few different ways, but they're basically the same as you're going from the general to the particular. Or you have a foundation to address the main question. So we saw over here, for example, and in fact, also with you, that we will have to do a bit of work in the middle here to get the right questions to allow you to go from this to that. This is just really the direction. This was the foundation for the direction, and this is your superstructure. This is the structure or the design of the whole car or the building. And now, but if you have the building very clear, you put the data into the building, the PhD. I have a bit of expression. You must let the PhD write itself. You must, instead of struggling to write my PhD, you must come up with a good design, and you are helping the design write itself. It's just a different way of thinking about doing the PhD. And if you're helping the PhD write itself, there is a good idea that should be a PhD, and you just have to help the good idea become the PhD it deserves to be. it's just a different way of thinking about doing it. Now, I'm very mindful, I think we're right on 1 o'clock. We can stop right here if you want, if you have to go. I'm happy to spend a few more minutes. We didn't really kind of get to this section. We could have maybe 10 or 15 minutes if people wanted to do that.
I think it's okay.
Or those that want, if some people need to leave, let's say if anybody needs to leave, you can leave. Otherwise, we have another.
Thank you so much.
Okay, sure. So let's have for those who want to stay, let's have another 10 or 15 minutes. And we're not going to do perfectly today, but at least I want you to think about how do you get from here to here, and you're going to ask some sort of questions in between. So some that are a bit more, depending on what you're trying to do, will be a little bit different. But let's have a very quick example. So in your case, let's have a bit of a go at this. We want to tap the market forces for smartphone applications, or game applications, and we want to develop really the attributes to tap into that. So really, what we're needing to build is the information. Let's say if you're thinking about, are we going to go and survey people, we're going to interview people, what sort of data are we going to collect to help us? Then I would imagine there's probably a couple of things, but the key one will be, what will be the attributes, I would call it profile or something like that, or formula. What would be the elements of the formula that could easily tap into the markets? That will be the most critical sort of outcome. So there's probably 2 or 3 key ways that we could explore if we have time. But let's try one way in that, let's say that let's say that we're going to go and interview people who use apps that I don't know how you're planning to do it, but let's say the people who play lots of apps are the people you should go and ask of what they like is a good app and a bad app, and what, and that will be a good place to start at least. The people who use the other market. So I could see that we would have questions here that in that maybe the first question, what would you say, could be about, I think what I would say, on top of my head, is that I would probably want to say, develop the attributes of the market itself. I think this is what you're trying to say, what is the age, gender, and interests of the people who tend to buy apps?
Actually, okay, at this high end, we have this objective variable, like age, gender, these kind of things. At the other end, which is the academic ends, they are looking at the theories, the abstract issues or concepts, which is not mostly understandable for practitioners. So I need to find something in middle.
Well, I will say this. I mean, I think in your case, I mean, theory. I think maybe the theory fits in after. I mean, one big mistake in PhDs when people go and interview other people and ask them to comment on the theories, and they have no idea about the theory. It's a waste of time.
Yeah.
So you don't. If you're going to try and explain, you want people to respond to a theory, you have to explain in very concrete terms.
Yeah, but actually the thing is, the whole idea from doing this, it comes from the games that they are in wrong hands. They develop a game like Angry Birds for kids, but adults are playing. So the whole issue for my study, I mean maybe for the whole app developer, is to develop a game application which goes to a right hand, that's all.
All right, so I think it's just a little bit of a complicated problem that I won't understand enough about until now. But what I will say is this, I think in this sort of example, I would use this to link up maybe 3 different areas to come together by the time we get to the top. So some will be building up in factors and etc. I think in your case, maybe it's we're looking at several different things. One that maybe, let's say, just for argument's sake, I mean there's a few different ways. Maybe if we're talking about attributes profile as an outcome, we're developing up profiles of several things that must get maybe.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I mean segmenting the market or developing the profiles will help the developers to develop a game which goes to right hand. So they can do the right promoting.
I think the concept of, I don't quite understand what you mean in the right hands or the wrong hands.
The right segment of which is
I mean, yeah, the right segment.
maybe the segment of the market which is supposed to.
Okay, but this will fit into that. So just run with me. I think you just adapt what I'm going to tell you. But I'm going to try. My focus is here just on helping everyone with the. In your case, what I would say is this: I get the sense that if we say that something about the right attributes profile is where we want to go to, I would consider this is going to be a combination of several key areas. One will be maybe possibly existing versus future markets, which is probably where what you're talking about of the good or bad, that will probably come into this. But I mean, I'm very much aware, especially I used to do a little bit on multimedia design, so I know a little bit myself on this. On educational games, about 10 or 15 years ago, I was doing stuff on it, so I know that it's still the same problem. A lot of it's to do with interface design. The interface design is part of what you need to really, so you're going to have to link interface design with market profiles and several different things, right?
Yeah.
So if you're going to try and build the knowledge to talk about an attributes profile that will successfully tap the market, make you lots of money, which is, maybe you want to do or maybe not, but then you're going to have to see how these things link together to get the best knowledge. So part of it also could be, for example, you'll get information from some of the literature about this is good design. Right? So some of that information. And also in terms of the fact that smartphone apps are pretty new compared to the traditional video games market is a bit different. It's quite a specific. So part of one of the questions I can see you'll have to answer as a general question is how is the smartphone app market different from the video game design profile and market profile? These are the sorts of ways you're going to have to do it. I think maybe, because yours is a bit complicated, maybe we focus on the other one, but you're getting the picture of some of what we'll need to do. And I still use the same principle. You can build up, but you can also jump around, so by the time you get to the top, you're linking it all together. Interface design, market forces, the difference between the smartphone app and the video game market, stuff like this. By the time you get to the top, we will have good knowledge of how it all fits together to allow you to answer your main question. So the basic principle of what I'm saying to you is still a very good one. But this is where it'll be a bit different to some other people. So let's come back to your example very quickly. Sorry, refresh me again. What did we say? Organisational, for the crisis management, organisational support.
You suggest to use organizational support to combine the factors of management awareness and also organizational culture support.
Okay, who and where you think you're going and getting collecting data? Because this is not literature. This is not literature review. The literature, it will relate to literature review, but this is more related to going and collecting data or information from people you interview.
Actually, the problem of active crisis management is in the whole world, not in Malaysia or Jordan or Middle East. It's in the whole world, even in America. Until now, there are many crises. After the crisis happened, it's found that it can be prevented.
All right, maybe we start with a foundation I mean, you will do some of this in the literature review, but as I say, the purpose here is a bit different, even though it overlaps. I think part of the purpose here is really to find a foundation of an overview of different approaches to crisis management. Right? So we'll have a question here, something along the lines of maybe, what is an overview of all the different key approaches and how do they disagree, or something along those lines. But basically what we're trying to achieve here is allow you to look at, not only to look at, but to get maybe if you're interviewing people, to see which approaches people like or don't like, or something like that in different countries. Something like that, we'll put up a question to allow you, I'm still quite not sure where you're going to do this, maybe in a local context or international or whatever.
Actually, I'm thinking to do it in Jordan.
Well, see,
Yeah.
for this, for the literature review, you would look, some of it will be international, but then you have to come down to the local context of what you need to do. So this also is coming more from the local context because this is where you're going to go and collect the data. Who are you going to talk to? Where are you going to get the data from? If it was people in different multi-country contexts, it's maybe a little bit different. So if you go and ask people in Jordan, what do you know about all the international models of crisis management? Maybe they can't answer this. So you'll have to sort of have questions, maybe more the questions of maybe the different aspects of crisis management.
Yeah, yeah. Actually,
Something along those
I'm thinking to
lines.
ask about